Mo3's closest friend, Brandon Rainwater Walker, walked into a Dallas courtroom during Yella Beezy's pretrial hearing and mocked him right to his face. This was not a slip. This was not nerves. This was a man who has been carrying years of history, years of loss, and years of unfinished business into a room where the law was finally doing what the streets could not settle. The room felt it. The energy said everything. And if you know the history between these two men, you already know why Rainwater was never going to sit in that room and stay quiet. Yo, what's good, fam? Welcome back. Today we are going all the way in on one of the most personal storylines wrapped up in the Mo3 murder case. We are talking about Brandon Rainwater Walker, his long-running conflict with Yella Beezy, the civil lawsuit that Rainwater took all the way to verdict and won, and what it means that he appeared to be mocking Beezy inside the courtroom during the July 2026 pretrial hearing. This one has layers. Let's get into it. To understand where we are right now, you have to understand where Rainwater stands in this whole story. Brandon Walker was not just a hanger-on connected to Mo3's circle. He was Mo3's manager, his partner in the business of building one of Dallas's most authentic rap careers. The two men were tight in the kind of way that goes beyond professional titles. Rainwater was there for the come-up, there through the grind, navigating the business of rap in a city that was just starting to get the national recognition it deserved. He was the person in Mo3's corner handling the infrastructure, while Mo3 handled the music. That kind of working relationship, built over years of shared goals and shared struggle, creates a bond that does not get replaced. When Mo3 was shot and killed on Interstate 35E on November 11, 2020, Rainwater lost someone he had been moving with day in and day out. That kind of loss does not just fade, and it does not make a man quiet. After Mo3 was killed, Rainwater became one of the loudest voices demanding accountability. He made himself available to media, sat down for interviews, and made it known in no uncertain terms how he felt about what happened to his partner and what he believed needed to happen next. He has done podcast appearances, spoken on his history with Yella Beezy, spoken about the civil lawsuit he pursued, and consistently positioned himself as someone carrying Mo3's legacy forward and demanding that justice get served. Fans of Mo3 look at Rainwater as one of the few people closest to Melvin Noble who never went quiet, never backed down, and never let the public forget what was lost on that Dallas highway. When Yella Beezy was finally indicted by a Dallas County grand jury in March 2025, Rainwater was one of the first people from Mo3's circle to speak publicly about it. He went on camera calling for justice not just for Mo3 but for Roy Lee as well. He was direct about where he stood. That energy, that refusal to soften the edges or play diplomat, has defined how Rainwater has operated throughout the entire aftermath of Mo3's death. And it is exactly why his presence in a courtroom where Beezy is fighting a capital murder charge lands the way it does. Now, to understand why Rainwater's presence in that courtroom meant so much, you also have to understand who he was in the room with. Yella Beezy, born Marcus DeAndre Conway, grew up to become one of Dallas's most commercially successful rap exports. His 2017 single, That's On Me, went certified gold, cracked the Billboard Hot 100, and brought real mainstream attention to the Oak Cliff sound. He collaborated with some of the biggest names in the game. On paper, Beezy was a success story, but underneath that commercial wave ran a current of street conflict that went all the way back to the early rise of his career, and it involved the same neighborhood, the same city, and eventually the same people who surrounded Mo3. The origins of the feud between Mo3 and Yella Beezy are the kind of story that only makes complete sense when you understand Dallas geography and culture. Both men came up representing Oak Cliff. That was their foundation, their identity. And for both of them, it was central to how they moved in the rap world. As the two of them rose in visibility around the mid-2010s, friction developed. Some reports suggest the tension may have started over a woman. Others point to the natural competitive energy that comes when two ambitious artists are occupying the same sonic and geographic lane. Whatever the original spark, the smoke was visible early on. The two camps were exchanging shots on social media and in their music, while the public was still putting together exactly what was happening between them. The first moment that ratcheted the conflict into something irreversible came in October 2018. Mo3's close friend and collaborator, Dallas comedian Roy Lee Pate, who went by Roy Lee, had been publicly questioning whether Yella Beezy actually had legitimate ties to Oak Cliff. Roy Lee was vocal about it. He had been challenging Beezy publicly, questioning his credibility, and generally putting his name and reputation behind the idea that Beezy was not who he claimed to be in the community. That kind of public challenge in that kind of environment does not just get ignored. Roy Lee was shot in North Dallas and died from complications, including a blood clot, in October 2018. He was Mo3's friend. Mo3 took that personally, publicly, and loudly. The day after Roy Lee died, Yella Beezy was shot 8 times in a drive-by on the Sam Rayburn Tollway in Louisville. He survived. The proximity of those two events was not lost on anyone watching. The streets connected the dots, and the music reflected it. Mo3 released this material in the wake of Roy Lee's death, and the feud shifted from words into something that felt like it had crossed into a permanent war. In 2019, Mo3 dropped the track 219, released on Roy Lee's birthday. The song was a direct address to the conflict, and it included bars about a bounty on his own head. Real talk, that lyric would later come back into this story in a major way. Around the same time, both men publicly downplayed the feud in separate interviews. In April 2019, Mo3 told Vlad TV he did not have any real beef with Beezy. In July 2019, Beezy returned to Vlad TV and went as far as to say he did not even know who Mo3 was. But anyone watching the music, the social media, and the streets knew that the calm was not the whole picture. Then January 2020 happened, and that is where Rainwater's personal story inside this feud truly begins. In January 2020, Brandon Rainwater showed up to V Live, a Dallas nightclub. What happened that night changed his relationship with Yella Beezy from something adjacent and organizational to something deeply and personally hostile. According to court filings and reporting by TMZ, Rainwater arrived at the club and was told by security to wait outside before entering. As he stood there, he says a security guard approached him with a gun in hand while Yella Beezy stood behind him. Fearing for his safety, Rainwater says he tried to flee the scene. He did not make it far. He claims Beezy and his crew chased him down and beat him in the street. Surveillance footage captured from across the street showed a man being pursued by a group and knocked to the ground while the attackers reportedly headed back toward the club's parking lot afterward. Rainwater ended up in the hospital that night with a dislocated hip. He underwent physical therapy. What made the incident even more charged was what reportedly happened after. According to the lawsuit documents, Beezy and his crew walked back to the club's parking lot and were caught on video appearing to brag about what had just gone down. That detail became part of what Rainwater brought to court, and once he was stable enough to plan his next move, that move turned out to be a lawsuit. Not a diss track, not a post. A civil lawsuit filed in a Dallas courtroom with the intention of making Yella Beezy pay. Now here's where we got to address something, because the numbers around this case got twisted on the internet pretty quickly. Rainwater initially filed a civil suit seeking damages up to $1 million. That is the number that spread everywhere online, and it created a narrative that Rainwater either won $1 million judgment or was seeking some astronomical payout. But that is not what the court record shows. Civil plaintiffs routinely file for higher amounts than they expect to recover, because the initial filing reflects the outer ceiling of potential damages rather than a guaranteed award. What the jury actually found, and this is the number that matters, is that a civil jury found Yella Beezy liable for the assault and awarded Rainwater over $325,000 in damages. That is still a significant number. That is still a jury of regular people looking at the evidence and deciding that Rainwater's account was credible enough to hold Beezy financially accountable. But the $1 million figures circulating online came from the initial filing, not the final verdict. Here is where it gets real interesting from a legal standpoint. The standard in a civil case is fundamentally different from a criminal prosecution. In a criminal case, the state has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the highest burden in American law. In a civil case, the standard is a preponderance of the evidence, which means the jury only needs to be convinced that Rainwater's version of events was more likely true than not. That lower standard is part of why civil verdicts can go against defendants even when criminal charges never get filed or do not result in a conviction. Rainwater went to civil court and won under that standard. Beezy was found liable. The jury believed Rainwater. But here is what makes that civil case even more significant in hindsight. According to testimony later given during the Yella Beezy capital murder pretrial hearings, The civil proceedings themselves became a flashpoint of additional violence. Lead investigator Detective Eric Barnes of the Dallas Police Department testified in court that during the civil trial proceedings, the judge was forced to move the proceedings to a virtual Zoom format after fights broke out in the courthouse parking lot between people associated with both sides. Detective Barnes used that detail as evidence that the feud was not just musical posturing. The violence followed these men into the courthouse itself. As Barnes testified, the feud was very much alive. Let that sit for a moment. This was not just two rappers beefing in their music. This was a conflict so charged that it could not even be contained inside a courthouse during a civil lawsuit. People were fighting in the parking lot over this, and Rainwater was at the center of all of it, fighting his own legal battle while the world around it was still combustible. That civil verdict also changed the public perception of the entire conflict. Before the jury returned its decision, there were plenty of people who looked at the V-Live incident and wrote it off as street business. That would stay street business. Once a jury of peers sat through the evidence and came back with a verdict in Rainwater's favor, the conversation shifted. It was no longer just allegations floating in the media, it was a legal finding. Rainwater had gone through the process, presented his case, and a jury decided he was right. That verdict followed Yella Beezy everywhere after that, and it continues to follow him now. It is also worth noting that the civil verdict came down in 2024, meaning Rainwater had already been through a full legal battle against Beezy and walked out on the winning side before the capital murder indictment ever came. That sequence matters. When Beezy was arrested in March 2025, Rainwater was not waiting for his first win. He had already stood in front of a jury, told his story, and received a financial judgment in his favor. The indictment was the next chapter, not the first. That context shapes why his presence at hearings reads so differently than it might for someone without that history. But here is where it gets real. Everything we just talked about is only the background noise for what became the main event. On November 11, 2020, Mo3 was killed on Interstate 35A in Dallas. He was shot in broad daylight by a masked gunman who exited a vehicle, pursued Mo3 on foot after his car stopped, and fired multiple times. Mo3 ran. He was hit, he was transported to a hospital, and did not survive. He was 28 years old. The investigation that followed would eventually lead to a grand jury indictment against Yella Beezy in March 2025. Prosecutors alleged that Beezy, whose legal name is Marquise Conway, paid Kewan Dontrell White and Devin Maurice Brown to carry out the killing. The charge is capital murder while remuneration, which under Texas law means murder for hire. It carries either life in prison without possibility of parole, or because Texas law allows it, the death penalty. Conway has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He maintains his innocence, but the weight of what he is facing is exactly as serious as it sounds. After being arrested in March 2025, Beezy had his bond reduced from $2 million to $750,000. He posted that bond and has been living under house arrest with electronic monitoring ever since. The trial was originally scheduled to begin February 2nd, 2026, under Judge Audra Riley, before being delayed when defense attorneys filed a motion for continuance, citing the need to process more than 16 terabytes of evidence provided by the state. The trial was rescheduled, and as of the time this script was written, the formal jury trial is set to begin August 24th, 2026. That brings us to July 2026, and the hearing that put Rainwater back in the headlines. On July 16th and 17th, 2026, Yella Beezy appeared in a Dallas courtroom for a critical multi-day pretrial hearing. The central issue was whether prosecutors would be allowed to use Yella Beezy's rap lyrics as evidence against him at trial. This was not a minor procedural matter. The outcome of this argument could significantly shape what the jury sees and hears when the capital murder trial finally begins. Prosecutors brought in Dallas Police Detective Eric Barnes, the lead investigator in Mo3's homicide, to walk the court through the full scope of the feud. Barnes spent 2 days on the stand detailing how the conflict escalated from verbal sparring to physical violence to what the prosecution describes as a murder-for-hire conspiracy. He testified that investigators relied on rap music and social media not as the foundation of their theory, but as documentation of an ongoing public conflict that the participants were broadcasting themselves. As Barnes put it directly to the court, people were not willing to speak and cooperate with law enforcement to help solve this crime. Instead, it was monetized through songs and carried out further and inflamed through music and social media posts. His argument was simple. When the streets go quiet and witnesses will not talk, you go where the subjects actually documented themselves, and these men documented themselves extensively. Prosecutors also cited a 2019 Beezy song called Hit Us, in which lyrics referenced putting money on somebody's head. They pointed to Mo3's own lyric from 2019, where he wrote about hearing there was a bounty on his head and predicting he would get killed. The prosecution's position is that these were not fictional artistic exercises. They were two men publicly acknowledging the reality of a bounty placed on Mo3's life, set against a backdrop of escalating violence, a $40,000 cash withdrawal Beezy allegedly made within days of Mo3's killing, witness statements, surveillance footage, and intercepted communications. The defense pushed back hard. On Thursday, July 17th, Beezy's legal team called in Dr. Eric Nielsen, a University of Richmond professor who has spent years studying the use of rap lyrics in criminal cases. Dr. Nielsen laid out a well-documented argument. Rap artists routinely adopt exaggerated personas designed for entertainment purposes, and jurors who lack what he called hip-hop literacy tend to interpret violent rap lyrics far more literally than those same words would be interpreted if they were labeled as country music or rock. He cited academic research showing that when study participants were shown identical violent lyrics, those told the lyrics were rap attributed much more literal criminal meaning to them than those told the lyrics were from another genre. He compared rappers to professional wrestlers, arguing that both create characters designed to be larger than life without those characters being literal autobiographies. His warning was direct. If jurors apply that same literal bias to Beezy's music, they could misread artistic expression as a confession, which he said was exactly the kind of thing that leads to wrongful convictions. Detective Barnes pushed back on Nielsen's framework, testifying that Conway and Mo3 were not playing characters. They were real people in a real conflict with real bodies and real money attached. The judge heard arguments from both sides and has not yet issued a ruling on whether the lyrics will be admitted at trial. The next scheduled pretrial hearing was set for July 22nd, 2026, with the trial still on track for August 24th. Now let me break it down for y'all, because this is where Rainwater comes back into the center of the frame. Reports and social media content from the July hearing indicate that Rainwater was present in the courtroom during the proceedings, and that his demeanor toward Beezy was interpreted by observers as mockery. The specifics of exactly what Rainwater did or said that observers characterized as mocking have been described in social media coverage but were not detailed in mainstream news reporting at the time of this writing. What is documented and verified is that Rainwater's presence was noticed, that observers reacted to his behavior as confrontational or dismissive toward Beezy, and that the moment spread quickly through the circles following this case, online. And here is the thing, whether you look at that moment as confidence or disrespect, or just a man who has been carrying a weight since 2020 finally getting to see the machinery of the law operating against the person he holds responsible, you cannot remove the context from it. This is Rainwater, the man who got chased down and beaten outside a club by Beezy's crew, the man who dragged Beezy into civil court and walked out with a jury verdict and $325,000. A man whose manager was killed in broad daylight on a Dallas highway and who has been speaking publicly about wanting justice ever since. If he looks satisfied inside that courtroom, the history behind that satisfaction runs years deep. Now let me address something important, because the internet, being the internet, the narrative around moments like this can run way out ahead of the facts. Every reaction, every look, every slight smirk or head shake inside a courtroom gets turned into a headline, and then the headline gets stripped of its context and shared 10,000 times before the full story catches up. What we know with certainty is that Rainwater was present at the July 2026 pretrial hearing. What we know is that observers interpreted his behavior as mocking toward Beezy. What we do not have from verified news reporting is a blow-by-blow account of exactly what he did that read that way. The behavior that people described watching could be as simple as a particular expression, a gesture, a comment to a companion in the gallery. The point is not to manufacture drama around an ambiguous moment. The point is to understand why whatever happened landed the way it did, and that understanding is entirely rooted in the documented history between these two men. The Dallas hip-hop community has been divided by this feud, in ways that track real neighborhood loyalties and personal relationships. Mo3 had a deep connection to South Dallas and carried himself as someone representing a specific experience of that city that fans felt was authentic and earned. His music spoke directly to the life he lived, and the people in that community recognized it. His death created a vacuum, and the people around him, Rainwater chief among them, have been filling that vacuum with advocacy, interviews, and continued presence in every arena where Mo3's name and legacy are being discussed. The community did not just lose a rapper on that highway in November 2020. They lost a voice that spoke for them, someone who had come up from nothing and was on the verge of something real. And they have been watching the legal process that followed with a level of investment and emotion that does not stay confined to courtrooms. Fans who side with Mo3 have rallied around Rainwater as someone who never flinched, never went quiet, and never let the story get buried. Fans or observers sympathetic to Beezy's position note that he has pleaded not guilty, that the case is still working through pretrial motions, and that the legal system requires the state to prove its allegations rather than simply assert them. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. A feud can be real and documented and emotional, and also proceed through a court system that demands evidence and proof before anyone is convicted. Real talk, what this case has become is bigger than just one criminal trial. It has become a referendum on multiple things at once. It is a case about whether rap lyrics constitute evidence of criminal intent or whether they are protected artistic expression. It is a case about whether the Dallas legal system will deliver accountability for the killing of a beloved local artist. It is a case about whether a civil verdict from 2024 was just the opening act of a longer story that ends in a criminal courtroom. And it is a case that has kept Rainwater front and center, because his presence at every turn, from the civil lawsuit to the pretrial hearings, is a reminder that this conflict did not begin with Mo3's death and has not ended there either. Let that sink in for a minute. From the original friction in the Oak Cliff rap scene, to Roy Lee getting killed and Beezy getting shot 8 times the next day, to Rainwater getting jumped outside V Live, to Mo3 getting killed on the interstate, to the civil verdict, to the fights in the courthouse parking lot during the civil proceedings, to the grand jury indictment in 2025, to Rainwater standing in that courtroom in July 2026 and apparently letting Beezy know exactly how he feels about being there. Every step in this story connects directly to the step before it. The judge presiding over the capital murder case, originally Judge Audra Riley and later Judge Chikan Yam, after procedural developments in early 2026, still has significant rulings to make before this trial begins. The admissibility of rap lyrics is one major open question. Whether the state's witness agreements will all survive scrutiny under Brady and Giglio obligations is another. The defense team has been aggressive in pushing back at every stage, filing motions to reveal deals made with witnesses, challenging the size and handling of the evidence dump, and now fighting to keep music off the table entirely. With 16 terabytes of potential evidence and a charge carrying the death penalty, both sides are fighting for every inch before this case ever reaches a jury. The formal trial is currently scheduled to begin August 24, 2026. Beezy remains out on bond under house arrest. He was granted limited permission to record music for up to 5 hours 1 day per week. He has been ordered not to contact victims or witnesses, and he has continued to maintain that he is innocent of everything the state is alleging. What are your thoughts on all of this, fam? Share them in the comments. And check out the video on screen if you want to stay up on everything developing in this case as we get closer to that August trial date.